My sister owed the mafia boss everything: his money, his protection, his mercy, maybe even her life. But when I walked into his world, carrying nothing but a forged signature and a lifetime of cleaning up her mistakes, he stopped looking at her and started looking at me. I was not rich. I was not dangerous. I was not the kind of woman men like Dante Moretti usually noticed. I owned a small flower shop in Brooklyn. I knew more about funerals than power, more about sacrifice than desire. But the night I found my name on a $500,000 debt I never signed, I learned something terrifying. Sometimes the most dangerous debt is not the one written on paper. It is the one your family expects you to keep paying with your life. Welcome to a channel built around mafia boss stories, but not just stories about crime. Some men are born to dominate. Some lessons are never taught in school, only in the streets, in silence and loyalty, and in the rooms where real power hides. This channel is about mindset, courage, discipline, emotional strength, and the secrets behind true authority. This story is a lesson about boundaries, about learning that love does not mean destroying yourself for someone who keeps betraying you. It teaches us that real strength is not shouting louder. Real strength is knowing when to stop paying debts that were never yours. Stay until the end, because the woman who owed him everything was not the woman he chose. And if this story speaks to you, like, comment, share, and subscribe for more Mafia Boss stories about power, loyalty, love, and the price of becoming stronger.
I spent my whole life paying for my sister's mistakes. I paid for the prom dress she swore she would return, and never did. I paid the late fees on apartments she left behind like old coats. I paid the hospital bill after she drank too much at a party and called me from a bathroom floor, crying like a child. I paid in cash when I could, in apologies when I could, and tea. And in pieces of myself most people never noticed were missing. But until that Tuesday morning, none of Vanessa N's mistakes had ever arrived in a black envelope with a death date written across the bottom. It was still dark when I unlocked the front door of Whitmore Flowers. Brooklyn looked half asleep. Sidewalks, slick from overnight rain, the streetlights glowing in puddles like broken coins. The heater inside the shop coughed twice before it started working, and the familiar smell of lilies, roses, damp cardboard, and old coffee greeted me like a tired friend. I had a funeral arrangement due by 8: white roses, white lilies, silver ribbon, a peaceful arrangement for a woman named Mrs. Donnelly, who had outlived 2 husbands, 3 brothers, and 1 son, but still smiled every time she bought daisies on Friday mornings. I was reaching for the delivery clipboard when I saw the envelope. It sat just inside the door, flat and black against the old wooden floor. No stamp, no return address, no logo. Just my name written in clean block letters: Clara Whitmore. For a second, I only stared at it. There are things your body understands before your mind is ready to catch up. My hand went cold before I bent down. My stomach tightened before I opened it. I knew, somehow, that whatever was inside had not come to ask me politely. The first thing I pulled out was a photograph. Vanessa stood outside a hotel I could never afford to walk into, wearing a cream-colored coat I had never seen before, and heels that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Her blonde hair fell over one shoulder, glossy and perfect, the way it always did when she wanted the world to forgive her before she even opened her mouth. A man stood beside her, his face turned away from the camera. His hand rested lightly on her lower back. The second thing was a debt agreement. $500,000. I read the number 3 times, because my mind refused to hold it. $500,000 was not money to me. It was not rent, or groceries, or overdue taxes, or the cost of fixing the flower shop refrigerator again. It was a number from another life. A number from rooms where men drank whiskey older than my car, and women like Vanessa smiled as if beauty could be used as currency. Then I saw my name at the bottom, my signature, or something pretending to be my signature. I know my own name. I have written it on rent checks, hospital forms, tax returns, supply orders, school papers for Vanessa when she was too young and too careless to remember deadlines. I know how my C curves when I am rushing. I know how the W in Whitmore dips when my wrist hurts. I know how my signature looks when I am tired, when I am angry, when I am trying not to cry. The signature on that paper was not mine. Below it, written in black ink, was one sentence. 72 hours, bring Vanessa Whitmore to Dante Moretti, or the debt becomes yours. The shop went quiet in a way it never had before. Even the heater seemed to lower its voice. I stood there with the paper in my hand and listened to my own breathing, slow and uneven. Somewhere outside, a truck passed. Somewhere upstairs, the pipes knocked. Life kept moving because life does that. It does not stop just because one person's world has split open. I called Vanessa first. Straight to voicemail, Vanessa, I said, and already my voice sounded too calm. That was how I knew I was scared. Call me back. Right now, not later, not when you feel like it now. I hung up and called again, voicemail. By the fifth call, I had stopped leaving messages. There were many things I wanted to do. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to throw the paper into the sink and set it on fire. I wanted to drive to Vanessa's apartment and shake her until the truth fell out. Instead, I finished Mrs. Donnelly's funeral arrangement because grief was still grief, even when my own life was falling apart. That was the kind of woman I had become, responsible even in panic, useful even when afraid. By 7:30, the flowers were wrapped, loaded, and sent out with our part-time delivery driver, Eddie. He noticed my face and asked if I was sick. I am fine, I told him. He frowned. You don't look fine. I rarely do before coffee. He laughed because that was what people did when I gave them a version of the truth small enough to carry. After he left, I locked the shop and drove to Vanessa's apartment in Queens. My sister lived in a building with a broken front buzzer and a lobby that always smelled like dust, perfume, and old takeout. The apartment was on the third floor. The door was not fully closed. That was when I knew. I pushed it open with 2 fingers. Vanessa? No answer. The apartment looked as if she had packed in a hurry, or as if someone had packed for her. The closet doors were open. Drawers hung crooked. Makeup was scattered across the bathroom sink, but the expensive things were gone. Her favorite red suitcase was missing. So was the framed picture of us from some other last Christmas. The one Vanessa always claimed made her look fat, even though she looked beautiful and I looked exhausted. I walked through the rooms slowly. There was a wine glass broken near the kitchen island, a lipstick stain on a napkin, faint trace of her perfume in the air, sweet and sharp, like flowers left too long in hot water. In the trash, underneath a torn shopping bag, I found a receipt from a place called the Belladonna Room, Manhattan, private club. 2 nights earlier, I took it. As I stepped back into the hallway, Mrs. Alvarez from across the hall cracked her door open. She was in her 70s, small and sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who knew every sound a building made and which ones meant trouble. You re Vanessa's sister, she said. Yes. Have you seen her? Mrs. Alvarez looked past me into the apartment, then lowered her voice. Men came here. Suits, black cars, bad eyes. When? Yesterday. Maybe midnight. She crossed herself. Your sister was crying, but not like someone being hurt, like someone not getting what she wanted. That sounded like Vanessa. God help me, it did. Did you hear the name Dante Moretti? I asked. The old woman's face changed, not dramatically, worse, quietly, like a curtain being pulled over a window. Honey, she said, if your sister got mixed up with Moretti, don't go looking for her. She still wants to be found. I drove back to Brooklyn with the receipt in my coat pocket and the black envelope on the passenger seat. By then, the city had woken up. People crossed streets with coffee in their hands. A man argued into his phone outside a bakery. A mother pulled a pink hat down over her child's ears. Ordinary life was everywhere, almost insulting in its confidence. I kept thinking about Vanessa at 16, sitting on my bed after our mother's funeral, asking me if I was going to leave too. I had promised her I wouldn't. I had meant it. I had not understood that some promises grow teeth. The flower shop was closed when I returned. I had looked at myself, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew someone had been there. Nothing was broken. Nothing was missing. The cash drawer was untouched. The register sat exactly where it belonged. Even the bell above the door gave its usual soft ring, as if pretending everything was normal. Then I saw the funeral arrangement. The one I had already sent out had been replaced by another: white roses, white lilies, silver ribbon, perfectly arranged, too perfectly. Whoever had done it knew flowers or knew enough to copy my hands. Beside the vase was a black card: Dante Moretti. Tomorrow, 9 p.m., come alone. I stood in the middle of my little shop, surrounded by flowers meant for love, apology, celebration, and death, and held the card until the edges pressed into my skin. For 34 years, I had believed fear was something that made people run. That night, I learned some fears make you walk straight toward them. He did not look like a man who needed to threaten anyone. That was the threat. The address on Dante Moretti's card led me to Little Italy, to a narrow street where the buildings leaned close together, as if they had been keeping each other's secrets for generations. It was the kind of street tourists photographed in daylight and avoided after dark without knowing exactly why. The sidewalks were wet from another cold drizzle, and the restaurant windows glowed gold behind steamed glass. Somewhere nearby, garlic and tomato sauce warmed in a kitchen. Somewhere else, a man laughed too loudly and then went quiet too fast. I parked 2 blocks away because my hands needed time to stop shaking before I walked in. Sat behind the wheel with the engine off, watching rain gather on the windshield. The black card lay on the passenger seat, simple and expensive, as if it belonged to a world where even threats had good taste. I thought about calling the police again. I thought about driving to the nearest precinct, placing the forged debt agreement on a metal desk, and letting someone with a badge tell me I was not alone. But Mrs. Alvarez's face kept coming back to me. The way her voice had dropped when I said Dante Moretti's name. The way she crossed herself like I had spoken of something older than crime. So I did what I had done my whole life. I put my fear somewhere it would not slow me down, stepped out of the car, and went to handle the problem Vanessa had left at my feet. The building was not a restaurant, or a club, or one of those glass offices where men in suits pretended their money was clean. It was an old funeral home. The sign above the door had been removed, but the outline of the letters remained, pale against the brick like a scar. The windows were covered from the inside with heavy curtains. Black lamps burned on either side of the entrance, soft and steady in the rain. A man opened the door before I knocked. He was broad, middle-aged, wearing a dark coat and an expression that told me he had already decided I was not dangerous. That should have made me feel better. It did not. "Miss Whitmore," he said. I hated that he knew my face. "Yes." He stepped aside. "Mr. Moretti is expecting you." The inside smelled faintly of beeswax, old wood, and flowers that had died years ago. Not rot, not dust, just memory. The hallway was polished, the walls lined with framed photographs of men in dark suits and women with serious eyes. Music played, no voices drifted from other rooms. The silence felt arranged. The man led me past a reception desk, past a closed viewing room, and into what must have once been a family parlor. There were dark green chairs, a low table, a fireplace that had not been lit, and a single lamp casting warm light over the corner of the room. Dante Moretti stood when I entered. That was the first thing I noticed. Not his suit, though it was black and tailored like it had been made for him by someone who understood power. Not his face, though it was handsome in a hard, quiet way, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples and eyes the color of storm water. Not even the fact that he was younger than I had expected, and somehow older at the same time. I noticed that he stood. Men like him did not need to be polite, which meant when they were, it was a choice. Or a weapon. "Whitmore," he said. His voice was low. Not soft, low. There was a difference. A soft voice invites you closer. A low one makes you lean in without meaning to, Mr. Moretti. He motioned to the chair across from him. "Please, Adararston." A flicker moved through his eyes. Amusement, maybe. Or interest. It was gone too quickly to name, as you like. The man who had brought me in closed the door behind me. I heard the click of it, small but final. Dante did not sit back down. He remained where he was, one hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. There was no gun on the table, no visible bodyguard in the room, no dramatic display of danger. Somehow that made it worse. He studied me for a moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he was not looking at my face so much as reading some decisions that had brought me there. My coat was old but clean. My boots were wet. I had not dressed to impress him. I had dressed like a woman who expected to run if she had to. Your sister, he said at last, has made your life very inconvenient. I should have been too afraid to answer the way I did. Maybe I was too tired. Vanessa has been doing that since she was 16. This is just the first time the bill came in writing. For one breath, the room changed. Not much. The lamp still glowed. The rain still tapped at the windows. But Dante Moretti looked at me as if I had done something unexpected. And I realized people probably spent most of their time around him, trying very hard to be expected. He sat down then and opened a leather folder on the table. You received the documents. I received a forged contract and a threat. Both can be true. I stepped closer despite myself. That signature is not mine. I know. The words landed so quietly I almost missed their weight. You know? Yes. My anger came before my caution could stop it. Then why am I here? Dante leaned back, not relaxed, exactly, measured. Because Vanessa is missing. That sounds like your problem. It became yours when she used your name. My name was stolen. And yet she chose your name specifically. He tapped one finger against the folder. People do not run to strangers when they are desperate, Miss Whitmore. Run to the person who has forgiven them the most. I looked away for first, and I hated him a little for making me do it. There are truths people can say kindly and still make cruel. Dante had not raised his voice. He had not insulted me. But with one sentence, he had stepped directly into the oldest room in my life, the one where Vanessa cried and I cleaned up the glass. You don't know anything about my sister, I said. I know she likes expensive rooms she cannot afford. I know she confuses attention with safety. I know she believes rules are flexible until they are not. And I know she has a sister who has been standing between her and consequences for a very long time. My throat tightened. Careful. His eyes lifted to mine. I am. That was the problem. He was careful. Every word was placed exactly where he wanted it. I folded my arms, partly because I was cold, partly because I needed something between us. What do you want from me? I want Vanessa found. Then hire someone. I did. Then why drag me into it? Because if my men find her first, she will run harder. If you find her, she may talk. There it was, not mercy. Strategy. I almost preferred the threat. And if I refuse? Dante was silent for a moment. Outside, a car passed slowly over wet pavement. He looked down at the folder and turned one page. Your sister took $500,000 from a channel connected to my family. That money was being watched by people who do not forgive embarrassment. If she disappears with it, certain men will believe I allowed it. In my world, allowing something and being unable to stop it look very similar. Meaning? Meaning weakness invites blood. The way he said it made my stomach turn, not because it sounded theatrical, because it sounded practical. I thought of Vanessa in that cream coat, smiling beside a faceless man. I thought of her standing in my bedroom at 16, asking if I would leave too. I thought of every time I had told myself she would grow out of this, whatever this was. Trouble, hunger, restlessness, the need to be seen by people who only noticed what they could use. Are you going to kill my sister? I asked. Dante's expression did not change, but something in the room seemed to lower its temperature. If I wanted Vanessa dead, you would not have 72 hours. It was not comfort. It was not meant to be. I let out a small breath. You say that like I'm supposed to be grateful. No, he said. Say it so we are not wasting time pretending the situation is gentler than it is. I looked at him then, really looked. He was not the monster I had expected, and somehow that made him more frightening. Monsters were easy. You ran from monsters. Dante Moretti was a man, a controlled man, a thinking man, a man who could say terrible things without enjoying them and still mean every word. I didn't have your money, I said. I didn't know where Vanessa is. And if you think I'll pay with my life for something I never signed, then you spent too much time around people who are afraid of you. For the first time, he almost smiled. Almost. You are afraid of me. Yes, I said. Just not interested in making it useful to you. That did it. The smallest change crossed his face. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition. He closed the folder. You have until Friday night. Or what? Or the men who are less patient than I am will stop letting me handle this quietly. Is that supposed to make you sound reasonable? No. It is supposed to make you understand that I am the reasonable option. I laughed once, short and humorless. That may be the worst thing anyone has ever said to me. I doubt that. He was right, I hated that too. I turned toward the door because I needed to leave before my fear found its voice. If Vanessa calls me, I will tell her to come in. No. You won't, I stopped. Dante stood again. You will tell her you are scared. You will tell her you need to see her. Make her believe you have not already decided what to do. Vanessa will not come for duty. She will come for guilt. The accuracy of it made me feel exposed. You really do think you know everything? No, he said. I think not knowing gets people killed. For a second, something else moved behind his eyes, a shadow, a memory. Then it was gone, locked away, before I could understand it. I reached for the door handle. Miss Whitmore. I turned back. Dante was looking at my hand. At first, I thought he was checking whether I carried a weapon. Then I realized his gaze had settled on the old silver ring on my middle finger. My father's ring. Large for most, so I wore it on a chain sometimes, but that night I had put it on without thinking. The engraving faced inward, pressed against my skin. Stay kind, stay standing. Dante's face changed so slightly that anyone else might have missed it. But I had spent years reading Vanessa's lies before she spoke them. I knew when a person had been struck by something invisible. Where did you get that? He asked. My father. What was his name? My fingers curled around the ring, Samuel Whitmore. The silence that followed was different from all the others. Not strategic, not controlled, human. Dante Moretti, the man who had spoken of debt and blood, as if they were items on a ledger, looked away from me. Long. But long enough. You knew him? I asked. Yes. The word was almost too quiet. How? Dante looked back at me, and for the first time since I'd walked into that room, he did not look like a man who owned everyone's fear. He looked like someone standing at the edge of an old wound. Your father saved my life. I stared at him. That was not possible. My father had been a taxi driver. A tired man with bad knees, gentle hands, and a habit of bringing home gas station donuts at 2 in the morning. He knew baseball scores, shortcut routes, and how to fix a leaky sink with the wrong tools. He did not belong in the same sentence as Dante Moretti. You lying, I said. No, my father never mentioned you. I asked him not to. Why? Dante's jaw tightened. Because at the time, knowing me was dangerous. At the time, his eyes held mine. It still is. I should have opened the door. I should have walked out and kept walking until the rain washed the smell of old candles from my coat. Instead, I stood there with my hand on the knob, feeling the whole shape of my life tilt slightly out of place. My sister owed this man $500,000. My name had been forged. My father, who had taught me to stay kind and stay standing, had once saved the life of a mafia boss who now held my family in his hands. Dante stepped around the table, but he did not come too close. He understood distance, or he understood control. Maybe, with men like him, those were the same thing. Find Vanessa, he said. Bring her to me before someone else finds her first. And if I do, then I will remember that I once showed me mercy when he had no reason to. I swallowed. And if I can tea? His expression hardened again, the wound disappearing behind the wall. Mercy may not be enough. The door opened before I touched it. The broad man in the dark coat waited in the hallway, silent as furniture. I walked out of the old funeral home into the cold rain, with Dante Moretti's words following me like footsteps. My father saved my life. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking again. Not because of the debt. Not even because of Vanessa. Because I had gone there believing I understood the story. Vanessa had made a mistake. A dangerous man wanted payment. I was the unlucky sister dragged into the middle. But now there was my father's ring on my hand, Dante Moretti's past in the room behind me, and the terrible feeling that the debt Vanessa owed was not the only one still waiting to be collected. Vanessa came home just after midnight, which was exactly like her. My sister never arrived at a reasonable hour, never called when the sun was up, never knocked on the door when life still had room to make sense. She came when the street was empty, when the shop lights were off except for the small lamp over the counter, when I had finally stopped pretending I was going to sleep and started sorting funeral ribbon ends by color because my hands needed something to do besides shake. The bell above the front door gave one soft ring. I looked up from the counter, and there she was. For 1 second, I saw the little girl she used to be. 7 years old, standing in the hallway after a nightmare, blonde hair tangled, blue eyes huge, asking if she could sleep in my bed. Then the present came back. Vanessa was 29 now. Her hair was still blonde but professionally colored. Her coat was cream wool, expensive and too thin for the cold. Her lips were pale, her mascara smudged, and one heel was scraped badly along the side. She looked frightened, beautiful, and guilty. "Clara," she whispered. I did not move. I had imagined this moment 100 times since opening that black envelope. Some versions I slapped her. In others, I screamed until the windows shook. In one, I simply handed her Dante Moretti-S card and told her to fix what she had broken without dragging me under with her. But then my sister S face crumpled. "Clara." I didn't know where else to go, and just like that, the old machinery inside me started moving. I locked the door. I pulled down the shade. I took her coat from her shoulders and felt how cold she was underneath it. I led her into the back room, the one we used for storage and late invoices and eating sandwiches over the sink during busy holiday weeks. I put the kettle on, because apparently there was no disaster in my life that I could not greet with tea. Vanessa sat on the old green sofa, with her knees pressed together, looking around as if the walls might accuse her. The room smelled of damp stems, cardboard boxes, and peppermint tea. Her eyes landed on the black envelope on my desk. She looked away too quickly. "You know," she said, "I know my name is on a contract I never signed." Her mouth trembled. I didn't sign it either. I turned slowly. "Don't start. Clara, do not start this conversation with a lie and expect me to build a bridge over it." That stopped her. For once, Vanessa seemed to understand that my patience was not endless. Or maybe she only realized I was too tired to be softened immediately. She wrapped both hands around the mug I gave her. "I didn't think it would get this bad. You never do." The words came out flat, not loud, not cruel. Worse than that, true. Vanessa closed her eyes. "I was in trouble, always in trouble. This was different. It always is." She looked at me then, wounded in that specific way of hers, as if my exhaustion were a betrayal. Vanessa had always believed that because I loved her, I should be ready for the next emergency before it arrived. Maybe that was my fault. I had trained her to believe it. I leaned against the work table and folded my arms. "Tell me about Dante Peretti." Her expression changed, not enough for most people to notice. But I noticed. Her shoulders lowered a fraction. Her fingers tightened around the mug. Fear was still there. Yes, but something else moved beneath it. A softness. A claim. "He saved me," she said. I almost laughed, but there was no humor in me. It's a generous way to describe a man who sent me a death notice. "He didn't send you a death notice. He sent me a 72-hour deadline. That means he's giving us time, us?" Vanessa looked down. There it was. One little word. And suddenly I understood something I had not wanted to understand. Vanessa had not come home because she was ready to face what she had done. She had come home because she still believed I was part of the payment plan. I sat across from her. "What happened?" She took a breath, then another. When she finally spoke, her voice had the practiced tremble of someone who had told pieces of this story before and learned which parts earned sympathy. She said she met Dante 6 months ago at a private party in Manhattan. She had been working as an event hostess, smiling at men who looked through her and women who looked down on her. A man named Bryce had been bothering her for weeks. Rich, aggressive, drunk most of the time, and used to hearing yes even when women said no. One night he cornered her near the service hallway. Dante saw it. Dante stepped in. Dante spoke quietly to Bryce, and Bryce left the party with bloodless cheeks and shaking hands. "He didn't even touch him," Vanessa said, and there was wonder in her voice. "He just spoke to him, and Bryce looked like he'd seen God." "Or the devil," I said. Vanessa ignored that. "After that, Dante made sure Bryce stayed away from me. Then he found out I owed some money." "How much?" "At first? 30,000. I stared at her. She winced. "I know. No, I don't think you do. I was going to pay it back. I had a plan." "Vanessa, hoping a rich man falls in love with you is not a plan." Color rose in her cheeks. "You don't understand that world. I understand debt." "No," she said. Sharper now. You understand small debt, you understand rent and grocery bills, and begging the electric company for 10 more days. This was different. These people don't just want money. They want to own the part of you that still thinks it can get away. For a moment, I heard something real in her voice, and despite everything, it hurt me. Because my sister was selfish. Yes, careless, yes, but she was also scared, and scared people often made the worst choices while calling them survival. What did Dante do? I asked. He paid it. Why? Vanessa's face softened again. Because he saw me. I sat back. There it was. The center of the wound. Vanessa had mistaken rescue for love. He gave me a safe apartment for a while, she continued. Someone drive me when I needed to go places. He got me work at better events, real events, where people had names that mattered. He never asked for anything ugly. He was respectful. Respectful men don't put other women's names on forged contracts. I told you I didn't do that, but you know who did. She looked away. I let the silence sit between us. I had learned years ago that Vanessa could survive anger, but silence made her nervous. Silence did not give her anything to perform against. Finally, she whispered, I borrowed more. From Dante? Not exactly. My head began to ache. What does that mean? It means there were people around him. People who said they could help me turn one opportunity into another. Investments. Introductions, private clients. I thought if I could just get enough money together, I could pay Dante back before he knew how bad it got. And instead, her voice shrank. Instead, the money disappeared. $500,000 does not disappear, Vanessa. It does when the wrong people are holding it. I stood because sitting still had become impossible. And my name? I swear to God, Clara. I did not sign your name. Did you give someone my information? She did not answer. That was enough. I turned away, pressing my hands against the edge of the counter. The wood was scarred from years of knives, wire cutters, and flower stems. My mother used to say every work table told the truth about what it had carried. Ours had carried weddings, funerals, anniversaries, apologies, and now this, my sister has us half confession, my stolen name. Dante Moretti's shadow stretching across the floor. You used me, I said. Vanessa began to cry. I was desperate. You always are after you make someone else responsible. She flinched, and I hated that part of me still wanted to comfort her. Before she could answer, headlights swept across the front windows. Both of us froze. A car door closed outside. Then another. Not loud. Controlled. I knew before the bell rang. Dante Moretti walked into my flower shop at 12:30 in the morning as if the hour had been arranged for him. He wore a dark overcoat beaded with rain, black leather gloves, and the same calm expression he had worn in the funeral home. Behind him, the broad man from the night before stayed near the door, silent and watchful. Vanessa stood so fast the tea spilled over her hand. She did not seem to feel it. Dante, she breathed. The way she said his name told me more than her entire story had. Not fear, only fear, hope. Dante looked at her, one brief unreadable glance. Then his eyes moved to me. Did you sleep at all? It was such a small question, so ordinary, so human that for half a second, I did not know what to do with it. Vanessa did. Her face changed as if he had struck her. I looked from my sister to Dante, then back again. The room felt suddenly crowded with things nobody had said. No, I answered, but that seems to be going around. Dante removed his gloves slowly. Yes. My sister straightened, smoothing her hair with trembling fingers. It was instinctive. I had seen her do it before job interviews, dates, court hearings over unpaid tickets. And every time she wanted a man to see the version of her that looked easiest to forgive. I can explain, she said. I know. She blinked. You do? I know most of it. Her face crumpled with relief, but Dante did not give her time to enjoy it. I know you accepted my protection and used my name to enter rooms where you had no business making promises. I know you took meetings with men I warned you not to trust. I know you gave them enough information about your sister to forge her signature. And I know you disappeared when the bill came due. Vanessa's lips parted. No sound came out. I looked at her, and something inside me went very still. How long have you known? I asked him. Long enough to know she was being used. Long enough to stop the contract from being placed in your name. Convenient, his eyes met mine. No, careless. I had not expected him to say that. Vanessa took a step toward him. Dante, I was scared. I know, they said if I didn't help them, they would kill me. I know that too. Her voice softened. Then you understand. Dante looked at her for a long moment. I understand fear. I do not understand why you handed them your sister. Vanessa recoiled. The words landed in the room like a glass breaking. I wanted to feel satisfied. I did not. I only felt tired and colder than before. Vanessa turned to me, crying now in earnest. Clara, I didn't think they would really use it. Thought they just wanted a backup name, some paperwork, something to make it look safer. You gave them my life as paperwork. She covered her mouth with one hand. Dante stepped closer to the work table, but not toward her. Toward me. I noticed because Vanessa noticed. I need everything she told you, he said. I almost laughed. Of course you do. This is bigger than Vanessa's debt. Everything is bigger than Vanessa's debt to the people who keep making us pay it. His gaze held mine, steady and dark. That may be true, but there is a man behind this who is using her to reach me. If he succeeds, your sister will not be the only one in danger, Vanessa whispered Victor. Dante turned his head. What did you say? She swallowed. His name was Victor Hale. At least, that's what they called him. He was tea like the others. Wore suits. Expensive ones. He knew things about you. The name changed the air around Dante. Not dramatically. He was too controlled for that. But I saw it anyway. A tightening in his jaw. A stillness that was not calm but calculation. Victor Hale, he repeated. You know him? I asked. Yes. The single word told me enough. Dante looked back at Vanessa. You should have come to me. I tried. No, he said. You tried to make sure I still wanted you after you lied to me. Vanessa stared at him as if he had reached inside her and pulled out the ugliest truth. That's not fair, she whispered. Dante's voice remained low. It is very fair, that is why it hurts. For one strange moment I felt almost sorry for her. Not because she was innocent, she was not. But because I understood the humiliation of being seen too clearly by someone whose opinion mattered. Vanessa wiped at her face. I owed you everything. Dante did not answer. She stepped closer. I owed you my life, Dante. Does that mean anything? His eyes moved briefly to me. Vanessa saw it. So did I. The room seemed to narrow around the three of us. The flowers on the shelves, the buckets of roses, the stacks of ribbon, the old sofa, the cooling tea, everything faded behind that one look. Dante Moretti, the man my sister owed everything, had looked at me when she asked what she meant to him, and Vanessa understood before I did. Her face hardened beneath the tears. I should have missed it. I wanted to miss it. But I had raised my sister after our mother died. I knew every shade of her hurt. This one was old and dangerous. It was the look she got when the world gave someone else what she believed should have been hers. Dante turned toward the door. My men will take Vanessa somewhere safe tonight. No, I said. He looked back. Stays with me, Clara, Vanessa whispered. Dante's eyes narrowed slightly. That is not wise. Yeah, probably not. She has already put you in danger, I know, and you still want her here? I looked at my sister, at her beautiful ruined face, her expensive coat, her shaking hands, at the girl who had once asked me not to leave, at the woman who had handed my name to strangers and called it desperation. No, I said quietly, I don't want her here. But am not handing her over like a package because powerful men have started moving her around. Something shifted in Dante's expression. Not agreement, not softness, respect, maybe. The kind a man like him did not give easily and could not take back without knowing he had given it. Then lock the doors, he said. Not answer for anyone but me. And if she runs again, Miss Whitmore, do not chase her alone. He put a card on the counter. This one had a number written by hand on the back. Then he left. The bell above the door rang once, gently, as if nothing important had happened. Vanessa sank back onto the sofa, crying silently now. I stood behind the counter with Dante's card in my hand, and my sister stood a trail between us like a third person. Outside, the black car pulled away from the curb. Vanessa owed him money, protection, safety, and the second chance she had already wasted. But what frightened me most was not the debt, or Victor Hale, or even Dante Moretti himself. It was the way my sister had looked at me when Dante walked out, as if I had stolen something from her, as if a man she owed everything to had no right to want me instead. Dante Moretti did not belong in my flower shop. Was the first thought I had when he returned the next morning, stepping through the front door just after 9, with the cold air following him in. He looked too dark against all that color, too controlled among buckets of roses and carnations, too expensive for a room where the ceiling leaked near the back window, and the cash register stuck if you pressed the drawer too hard. He wore a black overcoat, polished shoes, and the kind of silence that made ordinary things seem suddenly aware of themselves. The bell above the door rang once, bright and cheerful, as if it had no idea who had just walked in. Vanessa was asleep in the back room, or pretending to be. I had not slept at all. I had spent the night sitting on a stool behind the counter, listening for footsteps outside and checking every 10 minutes to make sure my sister had not climbed out the bathroom window. She had cried herself quiet around 3 in the morning, curled on the old sofa under a wool blanket, looking younger than 29 and twice as dangerous. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to forgive her. Mostly, I wanted 1 hour of my life where nobody else's disaster needed my hands. Dante glanced around the shop without moving his head much. His eyes did the work. He took in the front display, the delivery board, the locked back door, the stairs to the apartment above, the security mirror in the corner, the side alley visible through the narrow window. It would have annoyed me if it had not also been impressive. He looked at my world the way a surgeon might look at a wound, not cruelly, but with immediate understanding of what could go wrong. You early, I said. You reopen. That doesn't mean you were invited. No, he said, it means you unlocked the door. I should not have found that almost funny. I was too tired, maybe, or fear had begun to lose its sharpest edge and settle into something heavier. I turned back to the order I was working on, a dozen yellow roses for a man apologizing to his wife for reasons he had wisely not explained. If you came for Vanessa, she S in the back. If you came to scare me, take a number. I am overbooked. Dante removed his gloves slowly. I came because of Victor Hale. At the name, the air inside me tightened. What about him? He is not a man who makes careless moves. If he used your sister, he had a reason. He used your name, he had a second one. Lucky me. Dante looked down at the papers spread across my counter. Vanessa S. receipts, bank notices, printed emails, half-crumpled invitations from clubs and charity events she had no business attending. I had gone through all of it before sunrise, chasing patterns the way I arranged stems, looking for the one crooked piece that made the whole thing lean. Dante reached toward one of the papers, then stopped before touching it. I noticed that. You can look. He picked up a receipt from a charity gala in Midtown. What did you find? I almost told him nothing. Some stubborn part of me did not want to give him anything useful. But another part of me, the part that had kept a business alive through bad winters and worse customers, understood that pride did not pay bills or stop dangerous men. The money didn't go where Vanessa thought it went, I said, she said. She borrowed from men around you. But the deposits moved through a charity first. The Red Harbor Foundation. It sounds respectable, which usually means someone paid a lot of money to make it sound that way. Dante's eyes sharpened. Tapped another page. Red Harbor held a fundraiser 3 weeks ago. Victor Hale was listed as honorary chair. Vanessa worked the event. 2 days later, someone opened a business account using her information. 3 days after that, $500,000 moved through it and vanished. Then my name shows up as guarantor. Dante was quiet for long enough that I looked up. What? I asked. My people missed the charity. Maybe your people don't read floral invoices. He blinked once. Floral invoices? I held up a receipt. The gala ordered centerpieces from a shop in Manhattan, overpaid by $8,000, which nobody does unless they re-hiding money or trying to impress a woman half their age. The invoice number matches one of the transfer memos. For the first time since I had met him, Dante Moretti looked genuinely surprised. I should have enjoyed it more. Arrange flowers for funerals, Mr. Moretti, I said. Trust me, the dead leave behind more paperwork than the living expect. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close enough to change his face. It made him look less like a portrait in a dark hallway and more like a man who had once known how to laugh before life taught him to lock the door. Dante, he said. I frowned. What? If we are going to discuss laundering money through charity events in your flower shop, you can call me Dante. I'll consider it. You won't? No, I said. Probably not. That time, he did smile barely. But it was there. Before either of us could say anything else, Mrs. Donnelly came in, shaking rain from her clear plastic hood. She was 82, 5 feet tall, and had never been afraid of a living soul as far as I could tell. I looked at Dante, then at me, then back at Dante with open interest. Well, she said, you hired help? I almost choked. Dante looked at me, I looked at the ceiling. God, if you are listening, I thought. This would be an excellent time to strike me down. No, Mrs. Donnelly, I said. He's not help. Shame, he has good shoulders. She picked up a bundle of tulips from the front bucket and held them out to him. Here, sweetheart. Hold these a second while I find my wallet. Careful with them. They bruise easy. Dante Moretti, feared by men whose names I did not want to know, accepted the tulips like he had been handed evidence at a murder trial. Grip was too stiff, his expression too serious. The tulips drooped over his hand with delicate disapproval. I laughed before I could stop myself. It came out rusty and unexpected, and the moment I heard it, I realized how long it had been since anything had surprised laughter out of me. Dante turned his head slowly. I've handled more dangerous things than tulips, he said. And yet the tulips are winning. Mrs. Donnelly hummed. Flowers no character. Dante looked down at the tulips. That seems unfair to the flowers. She patted his arm as if he were a neighborhood boy instead of a crime boss. Most things are, sweetheart. After she left, the shop felt different. Not safer, not exactly, but warmer somehow, as if ordinary life had stepped between Dante and me and reminded us both that the world was not only made of debt and blood. Place the tulips on the counter with surprising care. People trust you. People need flowers. That is not the same thing. No, I said, sorting stems into a clean bucket. But sometimes it starts there. Dante watched me work. Not in the way men sometimes watched Vanessa, as if beauty were a thing to be consumed. He watched like he was trying to understand how I could stand there with a mafia debt over my head and still trim rose thorns so a stranger would not cut her hand. After a while, he said, "Why do you keep saving her?" I did not ask who he meant. The scissors paused in my hand. In the back room, Vanessa shifted on the sofa, still hidden behind the half-closed door. I lowered my voice. She's my sister. Dante's answer came quietly. Family is a reason to love someone. It is not a license for them to destroy you. I looked at him then, and for a second I hated him again. Not because he was wrong, because he had said it like it was simple. Like Dante could draw a line and expect the world to respect it. Women like me learned to draw lines in pencil because someone was always crying on the other side. You think I didn't know that? I asked. I think knowing something and living by it are not the same. That cut deeper than I wanted it to. I turned back to the roses. You'd get to give me family advice because my sister borrowed money from the wrong monster. No, he said. I get to give it, because I have seen what happens when loyalty becomes a leash. There was something in his voice then. A shadow, like the one I had seen when he spoke of my father. He had not always been this controlled. I was suddenly sure of it. Men were not born with walls that high. Someone built them, or someone forced them to. Before I could ask, the back room door opened. Vanessa stood there, wrapped in my old cardigan. Her hair brushed, her face pale but composed. She looked from Dante to me, then to the tulips on the counter, then back to Dante. She saw too much. Vanessa always did when it came to wanting something. You came back, she said to him. Dante's face closed. I said I would. Her smile trembled. For me? The silence that followed was small, but it was enough. Dante did not answer quickly enough. Vanessa's eyes moved to me, and I felt the shift before I understood it. Until that morning, she had been afraid of what Dante might do. Now she was as afraid of what he might feel. That was worse. Fear made Vanessa run. Jealousy made her cruel. I need coffee, she said, though there was coffee already made. She walked past us toward the front of the shop, her shoulder brushing mine a little too hard. Dante watched her, then looked at me. She should not leave your sight. She's been leaving my mindset her whole life. Clara, it was the first time, he said, my name. Not Miss Whitmore, Clara. I should not have noticed the difference, but I did. So did Vanessa. I saw her reflection in the front window frozen for half a second, Dante stepped closer, lowering his voice. Victor Hale is dangerous. Your sister is frightened. Frightened people make bargains. Vanessa makes bargains when she is bored. That too. I almost smiled, then stopped myself. Side across the street, a black sedan sat at the curb, not Dante's. I could tell because Dante saw it and went still. He moved toward the window, just enough to see without being seen. Did that car arrive before or after me? I swallowed. I didn't know. His jaw tightened. Lock the back door. It is locked. Lock it again. This time I did not argue. I went to the back and turned the deadbolt until it clicked. When I returned, Dante was already speaking quietly into his phone. Vanessa stood near the front display, watching him with a look I wished I could unread. It was not love. Not exactly. It was need dressed up as love. It was hunger. The face of someone who had mistaken being saved for being chosen. And as Dante ended the call, his eyes found mine before they found hers. That was the moment I understood the real danger had changed shape. Vanessa owed Dante money, safety, protection, maybe even her life. But whatever had begun moving between Dante and me inside my little flower shop had nothing to do with debt, and that was exactly why it could destroy us all. Before Vanessa owed Dante Moretti everything, Dante Moretti had owed my father his life. I did not know that when I found the old cigar box under the loose floorboard in my father's bedroom. I only knew that the black sedan across the street had not moved in 20 minutes, and Dante had gone quiet, in a way that made the entire flower shop feel smaller. Vanessa stood near the front window, pretending not to watch him. I stood behind the counter, pretending I was not afraid. We were all pretending something, I suppose. That was what fear did to people. It made actors out of everyone. Dante ended his call and slipped the phone into his coat pocket. That car belongs to one of Victor Hale's AS men. Vanessa went pale. How do you know? Because I know who watches me. I looked at him. And now they re-watching my shop. His eyes met mine. Yes. There was no apology in his voice, but there was something close to regret. Maybe that was worse. Apologies were easy to refuse. Regret sat in the room and breathed. What does Victor Hale want? I asked. Dante's jaw tightened. Leverage. Against you? Against me. Against my family. Against anyone useful enough to become a handle he can pull. Vanessa wrapped her arms around herself. I told you I didn't know how bad it was. I looked at her. Never know how bad it is until someone else is bleeding. She flinched, and this time I did not take it back. Dante watched me for a moment, then turned toward the back of the shop. You said your father drove a cab. The question struck me as strange. Yes. For how long? 31 years. Did he keep records? My father kept everything. Receipts, schedules, repair bills, old maps, birthday cards from people he barely knew. I frowned. Why? Dante did not answer immediately. He looked toward the window again, toward the sedan waiting across the street like a patient disease. Because Samuel Whitmore picked up more than passengers. A man who drives nights in this city hears things, sees things. Most people forget the driver is there. I thought of my father's hands on the steering wheel, knuckles swollen from age, fingers tapping along to old country songs on the radio. I thought of him coming home at dawn with coffee breath and tired eyes, kissing the top of my head before I left for school. My father had been a quiet man, but not an empty one. There had always been more inside him than he gave away. Of boxes upstairs, I said, from apartment. I never finished sorting them. Dante looked at me as if I had just handed him a key. I hated that look. I hated even more that I understood it. The apartment above the shop had belonged to my parents before it belonged to me. My mother had painted the kitchen yellow because she said winter in Brooklyn needed help. After she died, my father slept in the small bedroom facing the alley and kept the larger room for Vanessa and me. Later, after he got sick, he moved into a recliner by the window because lying flat made him cough. The apartment still carried pieces of all of us. My mother's cracked mixing bowl, Vanessa's old cheerleading photo, my father's baseball cap hanging by the door like he might come back for it. Dante followed me upstairs, but he did not touch anything. It surprised me. Men with power often believed every room became theirs the moment they entered it. Dante did not. He stood near the doorway while I pulled boxes from the hall closet, reading the labels in my own handwriting. Taxi papers. Dad medical. Old photos. Vanessa lingered behind us, barefoot now, wrapped in my cardigan. She looked smaller in the apartment, less glamorous, more like the girl who used to steal cereal from the box and deny it with crumbs on her lips. "I didn't know you kept all this," she said. "You didn't ask." Her face tightened, but she stayed quiet. I opened the first box, insurance papers, change receipts, traffic tickets, a faded photo of my father leaning against his yellow cab in 1999, smiling like he had just beaten life at cards. I placed it aside carefully. Dante came closer when I opened the second box. Inside were notebooks, dozens of them, small black ledgers bound with elastic bands, each labeled by year. My father's handwriting covered the spines in neat block letters: 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007. My throat tightened. I used to write down every shift, pickups, fares, addresses. I thought it was just habit. Dante picked up the 2007 ledger, then stopped and looked at me. "May I?" That almost undid me, the permission, the quiet respect of it. I nodded. He opened the notebook with the care of a man handling something heavier than paper. His eyes moved quickly over the pages. I watched his face. For a long moment, nothing changed, then his hand stilled. "What?" I asked. He did not answer. I stepped beside him and looked down. The entry was dated October 14, 2007. Young man bleeding, picked up near Mott and Grand. Refused hospital, took him to St. Agnes Clinic, no charge. Eyes like he had already buried himself. Name given: Dante M. The apartment went silent. Vanessa whispered, "That's you?" Dante stared at the page. For the first time since I had met him, he looked unguarded. Not soft. For soft. But open in a way that seemed almost painful. "Yes," he said. I looked at the note again. My father's words blurred for a second. Eyes like he had already buried himself. That sounded like him. My father noticed people in quiet ways. He noticed hunger, grief, shame, fear. He never made a performance of kindness. He simply did the thing that needed doing and came home before sunrise. "What happened?" I asked. Dante closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the wall was back, but not all the way. I was 24. Too young to be trusted and old enough to think I knew everything. Someone inside my family sold me out. I was ambushed behind a restaurant. Shot twice. I made it 3 blocks before I got into your father's cab. My breath caught. "He should have left me on the curb," Dante said. "Most men would have. I had blood all over his back seat. I would to give him my real name. I had a gun under my coat, and I told him not to call anyone." "What did he do?" "He looked at me in the mirror and said, 'Son, if you had enough strength to scare me, you wouldn't be leaking on my upholstery.'" A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. It broke in the middle. Dante's mouth curved faintly, but his eyes stayed on the ledger. Then he drove me to a clinic run by an old nun who had patched up half the neighborhood at one time or another. Waited outside until she told him I would live. "Did he know who you were?" "Not then." "And later?" Dante turned the page slowly, as if expecting my father's ghost to answer for him. "Later, yes. I tried to pay him. He refused." "Of course he did." "He told me something before he left," Dante said. I was angry, ashamed, half dead and still proud enough to hate being helped. "Your father looked at me and said, 'A man is not measured by who tries to kill him. He is measured by who he becomes after he survives.'" I looked away because the room had suddenly become too full of my father. Vanessa sat on the edge of the bed. She was crying, silently this time, but I did not know whether she cried for Dad, for Dante, or for herself. Dante turned another page. His expression changed. With memory this time, with recognition. "What is it?" I asked. He lowered the ledger onto the dresser and pointed to an entry 3 days after his. "Picked up Victor H. outside courthouse. Dropped near Red Hook warehouse. Met with 2 men. One called him counselor. Paid cash. Nervous hands. Federal plates nearby." Below that, my father had written one more line. Same night Prosecutor Bell disappeared. Tay did not speak. He did not need to. I felt the truth arrive slowly, like cold water rising around my ankles. Victor Hale was not just some polished political shark who had wandered into Vanessa's mess. He had been connected to dirty men for years. My father had seen him, written him down, kept the record, and now, somehow, all of it had come back to us. Vanessa stood. "What does that mean?" Dante looked at the ledger, then at me. "It means your father may have kept the one thing Victor Hale cannot afford to have found." My father was a taxi driver, I said, but even as I said it, the words sounded too small. Dante's voice was quiet. No. Father was a witness. I touched the old page with 2 fingers. The paper was thin, yellowing at the edges, but the ink was still there. My father's hand, my father's memory, my father, who had carried strangers through the city and kept their secrets better than they deserved. Outside, through the yellow kitchen curtains, the black sedan was still parked across the street. Dante noticed me looking. He knows, I said. Maybe not everything, but enough, yes. The fear should have swallowed me then. Instead, something else rose in its place. Anger, maybe? Or grief finally finding a shape it could stand inside. Vanessa owed Dante money. Dante owed my father his life. Victor Hale owed the truth to people who had never gotten it. And me? I was beginning to understand that I had inherited more than a flower shop, more than a ring, more than a lifetime of cleaning up after my sister. I had inherited a record, and some records, once opened, do not go quietly back into the dark. At a mafia table, a chair is never just a chair. I did not know that when Dante Moretti asked me to come to dinner, I thought dinner meant food. Conversation, maybe a few hard questions about my father's ledger and Victor Hale. I thought it meant sitting across from dangerous men and pretending my hands were not cold. I did not know that in Dante's world, where a person sat could say more than a wedding ring, a signed contract, or a loaded gun on the table. He came to the flower shop just before closing, while I was trimming the stems of red roses for a woman who had ordered them for herself after signing her divorce papers. Vanessa was in the back room, quiet in the way she became when she was listening to everything. The black sedan across the street had been gone since morning, but none of us believed that meant Victor Hale had lost interest. Men like Hale did not disappear. They simply stepped far enough back to make you wonder where they were standing. Tay looked tired when he came in, not weak. Never that. But there was something worn around his eyes, something the black coat and polished shoes could not hide. He placed a folded note on my counter. "There is someone I need you to meet tonight." I dried my hands on a towel. That sounds like the beginning of a terrible evening. It may be useful. Useful evenings are usually terrible. His mouth moved slightly, almost a smile. "This man knew your father. He drove with Samuel a few times years ago. He may know why your father kept certain names in that ledger. The mention of my father changed everything. It always did. Grief is strange that way. It can be quiet for hours, then stand up at the sound of one name and take all the air in the room." "Where?" I asked. "Freddy S., my family's restaurant in Little Italy." From the back room, Vanessa appeared in the doorway. She had heard enough. She always did. "I am coming." Dante turned his head toward her. "No?" Vanessa's face tightened. "You don't get to decide that." His voice stayed calm. "Actually, tonight I do." She stepped farther into the room wearing one of my sweaters as if it belonged to her now. "This started because of me. Victor used me. The debt is mine. If there are answers, I should be there." I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to tell her she had lost the right to demand a seat anywhere. But the worst part was, she was not completely wrong. It did start with her, or at least it had reached us through her. Dante looked at me, and I hated how quickly Vanessa noticed. "It is Clara's father's ledger," he said. "The invitation is hers." Vanessa gave a small laugh, sharp enough to cut. "Of course it is, Vanessa," I said quietly. She turned on me. "No, Clara. Don't do that. Don't use that voice like I'm being unreasonable. You met him 2 days ago, and suddenly you the one invited to family dinners. That's not what this is. Isn't it?" Her eyes shone, but she was not crying yet. Vanessa had different kinds of tears. These were being held back for effect. I knew Dante first. I looked at her for a long second. Knowing someone first doesn't mean you own the place beside them. The words landed harder than I meant them to. Vanessa went still. Dante did too, though for a different reason. The shop became quiet except for the low hum of the cooler and the rain tapping against the windows. Finally, Dante said, "If Vanessa comes, she sits where I tell her to sit and speaks when asked. No performances." Vanessa lifted her chin. "Fine." But nothing about her was fine. That night, Moretti's looked like the kind of restaurant that had survived because it understood more than food. The sign was old, the windows warm, the brick dark from decades of weather. Inside, the air smelled of garlic, wine, roasted tomatoes, and money that had learned to behave in public. Men in suits stood when Dante entered. Women looked up from glasses of red wine and measured me in one glance. Nobody stared at Vanessa. That bothered her more than if they had. His hand hovered near my back but did not touch me. I noticed. He was careful with contact, or maybe careful with me. Either way, I felt the space between his palm and my coat, as if it were a hand itself. A long table waited in the private room. There were 12 chairs. At the head was Dante S. I knew that without being told. Some places announce ownership. His did. To his left sat an older woman with silver hair and diamond earrings, who looked like she had buried men better than most people raise children. To his right was an empty chair. Vanessa saw it. So did I. I moved toward that chair naturally, almost confidently, as if it had been waiting for her. Maybe once, in some other version of this story, it would have been. Maybe Dante had once let her stand close enough to mistake protection for promise, but before she reached it, Dante pulled the chair out and looked at me. Clara. My name was not loud. It did not need to be. The room went silent. I stood there with my coat half unbuttoned, feeling every eye turn toward me. I did not understand the full meaning then, not all of it, but I understood enough. The chair beside Dante was not hospitality. It was a statement. It said I was under his protection. It said I mattered. It said he had chosen where I belonged before everyone who might question it. Vanessa's face drained of color. I should have refused. Smart someone might have refused. But my father's ledger was in my purse. Victor Hale was somewhere in the city planning his next move, and Dante was watching me with an expression that held no command, only invitation, so I sat. The dinner began with wine and bread, with low voices and old names. Dante introduced me to the man who had known my father, a retired driver named Leo Burke, with thick hands and tired eyes. Leo remembered Samuel as the only cabbie in Manhattan who could keep his mouth shut without acting stupid. He told me my father once drove 3 men from a courthouse to Red Hook and came back looking like he had seen a ghost but would not name it. He did not know Victor Hale well, but he remembered the prosecutor who vanished that week. Everyone did. Men disappeared in stories all the time, Leo said, but good men disappearing left a different kind of silence. Listened, asked questions, took mental notes. Beside me, Dante said little. That was his way. He let other people fill the room, then used the shape of their words to find what they were hiding. Vanessa sat farther down the table, near 2 women who did not bother pretending to include her. Every time I glanced her way, she was looking at Dante. Not at me, at him, waiting for him to look back. He rarely did. Halfway through the meal, Dante's Uncle Frank leaned back in his chair and gave me a smile that did not reach his eyes. He was broad, gray-haired, and comfortable in his cruelty. So this is the flower girl. The table quieted. Dante's hand stilled beside his wineglass. But he did not speak. Half a second, I was angry at him for that. Then I understood. He was not abandoning me. He was giving me the room to answer for myself. I set down my fork. I arrange flowers for funerals, Mr. Moretti. I've seen enough powerful men lying still in caskets to know everybody eventually needs an ordinary person to do one last kind thing for them. No one moved. Frank's smile disappeared. The silver-haired woman at Dante's left made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been approval. Dante did not smile, but his eyes changed, warmed, maybe, or deepened. Something in them reached across the small space between us and stayed there. That was when I felt Vanessa's stare. After dinner, I stepped into the hallway to breathe. The room had been too warm, the voices too low, the meaning under every gesture too heavy. I stood near the old photographs on the wall, looking at men who had built the Moretti, name one secret at a time. Vanessa came out behind me. You must be enjoying this, she said. I turned. Enjoying what? Being chosen. Her voice cracked on the word. You always act like you don't want anything, Clara. Like you above it. But, look at you. Sitting beside him, speaking at his table, wearing that humble little face while everyone sees what he's doing. I didn't ask for that chair. No, she whispered. That's what makes it worse. Before I could answer, Dante appeared at the end of the hallway. Vanessa saw him and straightened, wiping the pain from her face too late. She walked toward him, leaving me by the photographs. I owed you everything, she said. I did what you asked. I stayed when you told me to stay. I waited when you told me to wait. So why her? Dante looked past her for one brief second. At me. Vanessa saw it. The last soft thing in her expression hardened. Dante said quietly, because Clara never tried to turn gratitude into ownership. Vanessa flinched as if he had slapped her. I wanted to look away, but I could not. Some moments demand witnesses, even when they are ugly. Vanessa stepped back, tears shining in her eyes. But these were not the tears from the flower shop. These did not ask to be saved. These promised punishment. That night, my sister stopped wanting Dante Moretti to forgive her. She wanted me to lose what she believed should have been hers. The cruelest betrayals do not come from strangers. Strangers have to guess where to cut. Family already knows. After the dinner at Moretti's, I brought Vanessa back to the apartment above the flower shop, and neither of us spoke for the entire ride. Dante had offered to send a car. I refused. I needed the cold air, the wet streets, the ordinary sound of traffic, anything that did not smell like red wine, old money, and the kind of power that made men lower their voices. Vanessa sat beside me, staring out the passenger window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had stopped crying before we left the restaurant. That worried me more than tears would have. Vanessa cried when she wanted comfort. When she went quiet, she was making decisions. At the shop, she went straight upstairs without turning on the lights. I followed slowly, locking the door behind us, checking the back entrance twice, then standing in the dark among the buckets of roses and carnations until my breathing settled. The chair beside Dante still haunted me. I had not asked for it. I had not even understood what it meant until I saw the faces around the table. But Vanessa understood. She understood before I did, and that was the problem. My sister had always been quick to recognize when someone else had something she wanted. Upstairs, I found her in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water with shaking hands. Her makeup had smudged at the corners of her eyes. The cream sweater she had borrowed from me slipped off one shoulder. "You embarrassed me tonight," she said. I was too tired to soften my answer. "No, Vanessa, Dante did that. She turned toward me. Because of you. Because you believed a man owed you love. Because he once gave you protection." Her face twisted. "You don't know what it felt like. I know what it feels like to mistake being needed for being loved. Trust me, I know." That stopped her for half a second, but not long enough. She set the glass down too hard. Water spilled over the rim. "You always do this," she whispered. "You make yourself the reasonable one. The good one. Tired martyr, who never asks for anything. Then when someone finally looks at you, everyone is supposed to pretend you didn't want it." The words hit harder than I expected, because there was just enough truth in them to bruise. I had not wanted Dante Moretti. Not at first. I had wanted my name off a forged contract, my sister alive, my father's memory left in peace. But I could not deny what had changed in me when Dante said my name. I could not deny that when he looked at me, he saw more than the woman everyone leaned on. "I didn't take anything from you," I said. Vanessa laughed once, sharp and bitter. "You never think you do." She walked past me into the small bedroom and closed the door. I stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the old pipes knock in the walls, and told myself she was only hurt. Hurt people say things. Hurt people lash out. Hurt people do not always mean to destroy you. It was one of the lies that had kept me tied to Vanessa for too long. I learned later that she left before dawn. She took the fire escape, wearing my coat and carrying my father's ledger copy in her purse. Not the original. I had hidden that under a loose floorboard after dinner, some instinct making me more careful than usual. But Vanessa did not know that. She thought she had taken the thing Victor Hale wanted most. He met her in a hotel lounge near Midtown, the kind with velvet chairs, low lighting, and waiters trained not to notice fear. I was not there, but I can imagine it because Vanessa told me enough afterward, and because by then I understood Victor Hale. He would not have started with threats. Men like him knew threats made desperate people defensive. He would have started with sympathy. He told her Dante would never choose her. He told her I had taken her place. He told her she was still young enough, beautiful enough, clever enough to begin again somewhere warm where nobody knew her mistakes. Miami, maybe? A clean apartment, cash, new identification, no debt, no Dante. No Clara standing in the doorway like a living reminder of every time she had failed. All she had to do was bring him the ledger and deliver me to a place where Dante could be forced to make a trade. Vanessa told him she would not hurt me. Victor told her nobody wanted to hurt me. That is how evil often enters a room, not with a knife, with reassurance. Called me at 9:17 that morning. I was in the shop cutting stems with hands that had not stopped aching since the night before. Dante had called twice. I had not answered. I needed time to think without his voice rearranging my fear into something that looked like courage. When Vanessa's name appeared on my phone, my stomach dropped. Clara, she said, crying hard enough that I could barely understand her. I am sorry, I am so sorry. Where are you? I can come back. I messed everything up, Vanessa, where are you? The docks, near Red Hook. I just need to see you once before I go, please. Just you. Dante. If he comes, they'll know. Every sensible part of me knew it could be a trap. But love is not always sensible. Sometimes love is a door may be locked from the outside. And still you walk through, because the voice on the other side once belonged to a little girl who slept beside you after nightmares. I told Eddie to watch the shop. I put my father's original ledger under the floorboard, took only the copy Vanessa had not found, and drove to Red Hook with Dante's number glowing unanswered on my phone. The docks were gray and wet, the sky low over the water. Shipping containers stood in long rust-colored rows. A gull cried somewhere above me. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and old rain. Vanessa stood near a warehouse with peeling blue paint, her arms wrapped around herself. For 1 second, relief moved through me. She was alive. Then 2 men stepped out from behind a parked truck. Sister closed her eyes. I looked at her, and the relief inside me turned to stone. No, I said softly. Clara, I didn't have a choice. I stared at her. You always say that right after making one. One of the men took my purse. Another checked my coat pockets. Vanessa would not look at me. Then Victor Hale stepped from the warehouse. In person, he looked exactly like the kind of man people trusted on television. Silver hair, navy overcoat, calm smile, clean hands. He looked at me like I was not a person, but a useful delay. Whitmore, he said. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I almost laughed. That seems to be going around. His smile thinned. You have your father's ledger? No. He glanced at Vanessa, she whispered. I brought what I found. Victor's face changed just enough for me to know he had expected better. He opened my purse, removed the coppered pages, and looked through them. His irritation was quick, controlled, but real. This is incomplete. I looked at Vanessa. She finally met my eyes. That was when she understood. She had not only betrayed me, she had failed at it. Victor nodded to one of the men. Bring her inside. As they pulled me toward the warehouse, Vanessa stepped forward. Said you wouldn't hurt her. Victor did not even look at her. I said what you needed to hear. Inside, the warehouse was colder than outside. They put me in a small office with dirty windows and a broken desk. My hands were tied. Not tightly enough to injure, but tightly enough to remind me they could. Victor wanted Dante. I understood that quickly. I was not the prize. I was the message. But I had spent my life in a flower shop, and people underestimate women who work with beautiful things. They forget flowers arrive in wire, glass, staples, blades, twine, pins, tape, and thorns. In my sleeve, tucked there from habit, was a short piece of floral wire. It took me 20 minutes to work it loose, 10 more to cut through the cheap zip tie. I did not run. Running without knowing the exits was panic. Instead, I listened. Trucks on the east side, water to the south, 2 men outside the door, train horn in the distance, a loose window frame behind the desk. On the desk was a stack of discarded packing paper. I tore off a corner and wrote with a half-dead pencil I found in the drawer. Red Hook, Blue Warehouse, Vanessa betrayed me, tell Dant. When a young dock worker came in to take out the trash, I slipped the note into the pocket of his hoodie as he passed. I did not notice then. I prayed he would notice later. Maybe God was listening. Maybe my father was, because less than an hour after Victor Hale told me no one was coming, the whole warehouse went silent. Not empty. Silent. The kind of silence that happens when dangerous men realize a more dangerous man has arrived. Dante Moretti came for me with the force of an empire. But the first door, I opened myself. And after that day, I never again let anyone call me a woman who simply got rescued. Being protected can feel very close to being owned if the man protecting you does not know the difference. I learned that in the back seat of Dante Moretti's car, wrapped in his black coat with my wrists bruised from the zip ties, and my sister's betrayal still sitting in my chest like a stone. Dante sat beside me, not touching me, not speaking unless he had to. Men had moved around us with quiet efficiency after the warehouse doors opened, and Victor Hale's people scattered like rats in sudden light. No shouting, no wild gunfire, no movie scene. Just doors blocked, phones taken, names written down, favors called in. That was how Dante worked. He did not bring chaos. He ended it. I should have felt safe. Part of me did. A tired, trembling part of me wanted to lean into the warmth of his coat and let someone else think for a while. But safety, I was beginning to understand, could become dangerous when it came with locked doors and decisions made over your head. "Where is Vanessa?" I asked. Dante looked out the window. "Alive." That was to my question. His jaw tightened. "My men have her." I turned toward him slowly. "Where in a safe place?" The words were meant to comfort me. They did the opposite. "Safe for who? For her? For you?" "No," I said, and my voice sounded strange even to me. Quiet, but sharp enough to cut. "Dawn to do that." Dante finally looked at me. "She handed you to Victor Hale." "I know what she did. She would have let them use you to get to me." "I know that too." "Then you should understand why I cannot let her walk around freely." I laughed once, without humor. His eyes darkened. "Clara." "No." I pulled his coat tighter around me, not because I was cold now, but because I needed something between my hands and the urge to shake. "You don't get to decide what happens to my family just because you have enough men to lock every door in the city. She put you in danger. She has been putting me in danger since we were children. That does not make her yours to handle." Dante went very still. "I am trying to protect you." That was when I understood the thing I had been too frightened to name. Dante's protection was real, so was his fear. But the two had tangled together until even he could not tell them apart. "No," I said. "You are trying not to feel afraid. Those are not the same thing." The car went silent. For the first time since I had known him, Dante Moretti looked as if I had struck him somewhere no one could see. When we reached one of his buildings in Lower Manhattan, he brought me to a private room where Vanessa sat at a table, pale and shaking with a glass of untouched water in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, and for one terrible second, I saw my little sister again. Then I remembered the docks. "Clara," she whispered, "I didn't think he would hurt you." I stood across from her. "You never think things will get this bad, but other people always have to live inside what you didn't think about." She began to cry. The tears did not move me the way they used to. Maybe that was cruel. Maybe it was survival. "I'm sorry," she said. "I believe you." My voice shook. "But sorry does not erase what you chose." She covered her face with both hands. "I was scared, I know, and I love you. But I am done paying the price for being the person you run to after you ruin everything." Vanessa sobbed harder. I let her. For once, I did not cross the room to hold her. When I stepped back into the hallway, Dante was waiting. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were not. "I can take you somewhere safe," he said. I shook my head. "No, Clara, I need to go home. It is not safe." "Maybe not, but it is mine." He looked like he wanted to argue. He did not. That mattered more than any apology he could have offered. At the elevator, I turned back to him. "You chose me in front of your whole world, Dante. Now I need to know if you can let me choose you without pressure." His voice was low. "And if you didn't," my chest hurt, "then you will have to let me go." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stepped aside. The elevator doors opened. I walked in alone. For the first time, Dante Moretti did not use power to keep the woman he wanted. Let me walk away. Maybe that was the first thing that made me believe he could learn to love me right. Loyalty is not silence. Loyalty is telling the truth before the lie destroys everyone. I learned that 3 days after I walked away from Dante Moretti, sitting alone on the floor of my apartment, with my father's old boxes spread around me like evidence from a life I had never fully known. The flower shop was closed downstairs. The phone had rung 12 times that morning, twice from Dante, 3 times from numbers I did not recognize, once from Vanessa. I answered none of them. For once, nobody got to pull me into the next emergency before I had decided who I wanted to be inside it. The original taxi's ledger lay open beside me. My father's handwriting filled the pages, steady and plain, as if he had never known he was recording dangerous men. Ups, drop-offs, street corners, names, weather, small details that seemed meaningless until they stood next to the right secret. I turned the framed family photo over in my hands, the one from our last Christmas before Mom got sick. Vanessa had been 15, grinning in a red sweater. I stood behind her, already looking tired. Dad had one hand on each of our shoulders. Something rattled behind the cardboard backing when I moved it. I pried the frame open with a butter knife. A folded page slipped out. For a while, I only stared at it. I knew my father's habits. He did not hide things unless he believed they needed to survive him. The page was from the same year Dante had been shot. On it, Dad had written about Victor Hale again. This time, there was a warehouse address, the name of a missing federal prosecutor, and one line underlined twice. If anything happens, this man is not clean. My father hadn't just seen Victor Hale. He had understood him. I drove to Dante S. building just after sunset. His men saw me coming and did not stop me. Maybe he had told them not to. Maybe they had learned by then that stopping me only wasted time. Dante was in a private office overlooking the city, his jacket off, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a dozen files open on the desk. He looked up when I entered, and for 1 second all the control left his face. He stood, Clara. I placed the folded page on his desk. I found what Hale is afraid of. He did not touch it right away. His eyes stayed on me. Are you here because you need help? No. My voice shook, but I held it steady. I am here because I have a plan. That was the first time I saw him understand the difference. I told him my conditions before I told him anything else. No more secrets that affected my safety. No decisions made for me. Vanessa would face what she had done, but she would be given one chance to tell the truth. And when this was over, I would not become a symbol, a prize, or a woman hidden behind Moretti doors. Dante listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, agreed. That easily? No, he said, not easily. Honestly. The words sat between us, fragile and unfamiliar. Vanessa was brought in an hour later. She looked smaller than I remembered, pale, sleepless, stripped of glamour. She would not meet my eyes until I said her name. I'm not here to save you, I told her. Her face broke. I'm here to give you one chance to stop running. We laid out the choice. She could disappear and spend the rest of her life as the woman who sold her sister for a way out. Or she could meet Victor Hale wearing a wire and help expose the man who had used her fear, her greed, and her jealousies like handles on a door. Vanessa cried. Then for once, she did not ask me to fix it for her. I'll do it, she whispered. The meeting happened that night in a hotel lounge, full of soft lights and expensive lies. Dante had people outside. Sat in a parked car 2 blocks away, listening through an earpiece while Vanessa faced Victor Hale alone. Her voice trembled at first, but she did it. She got him to say he used her account. She got him to say Dante had been the target. She got him to mention my father's ledger. Then Victor went quiet. You re-wearing something, he said. My blood turned cold. Dante moved before I could speak. His men closed in, but I was already out of the car. Running through the rain, because this time I was not chasing Vanessa to save her from consequences. I was going because consequences did not have to mean death. We reached her before Victor's driver could force her into the back exit. Dante's men handled Victor's people with quiet precision. Dante himself never raised his voice. Only looked at Hale and said, You should have left Samuel Whitmore's daughters alone. Later, in the alley behind the hotel, Vanessa stood shaking beneath a borrowed coat. She looked at me with mascara streaked down her face. I hated the way he looked at you, she said. Like you were home. I never knew how to be home for anyone. I was too tired to lie to her. You don't have to be someone else's home, I said. You just have to stop burning down the homes of people who love you. She sobbed then, and I let her lean against me, but I did not carry her. That was the difference. I did not abandon my sister. I only stopped lying down so she could step over me and call it love. Some debts are real, some are forged, and some only exist because we keep agreeing to pay them. Morning, Victor Hale's world began to collapse in the careful public way powerful men fear most. Dante could have handled him quietly, I knew that. One phone call, one closed door, one story that never reached the papers. That was the old way, the Moretti way. But when Dante looked at me across his office and said, "There are easier ways to end this," I shook my head. If you make him disappear, he becomes a rumor. If we expose him, he becomes a lesson. For a long moment, Dante said nothing. Then he nodded, and for the first time, he chose my way over his instincts. The evidence went out before sunrise. Copies of my father's ledger, Vanessa's recording, the bank transfers through Red Harbor Foundation, Victor's connection to the missing prosecutor, all of it. Dante sent one set to an investigative reporter who owed him nothing and feared him enough to verify everything twice. I sent another to a federal judge my father had once driven home during a snowstorm. A name circled in the ledger with the note, "Honest man, bad coffee." A third went to an independent prosecutor outside Victor S. reach. Noon, Victor Hale's campaign office was surrounded by cameras. By 3, his donors were pretending they had never met him. By evening, his smile was gone from every television screen in New York, replaced by footage of him walking into a courthouse with his jaw tight and his hands hidden under a coat. Vanessa watched the news from the sofa in Dante's office, wrapped in a gray blanket that made her look younger and older at the same time. She did not celebrate. None of us did. Some victories arrived too late to feel clean. When Dante told her the financial debt was erased because it had been part of Victor S. scheme, she covered her mouth and cried. It was not finished. She would still have to testify. She would have to leave New York for a while. She would have to stop using me as a shield every time her life caught fire. Vanessa nodded through her tears. Then she looked at Dante and asked the question that had been rotting inside her from the beginning. "You ever love me?" Dante's face did not harden. "That was mercy. I wanted to save you," he said. "You mistook that for love. Maybe in the beginning I did too. That broke her, but not cruelly. Sometimes the truth breaks what the lie has been keeping alive." I sat beside her, and when she reached for my hand, I let her take it. I did not promise everything would be fine. I did not tell her all was forgiven. I only held her hand long enough for her to know that consequences were not the same as abandonment. Later that night, Dante came to the flower shop. No guards inside, no perfect black coat, no performance. A tired man standing among roses and lilies, looking at me as if he had finally run out of ways to hide from himself. "I don't know how to love without protecting too much," he said. "I don't know how to be afraid without trying to control the room. But I want to learn." I looked at him for a long time. "I don't want to become your conscience, Dante. You have to want to become better because you choose it." He nodded. "I do." So I told him what I wanted. The shop stayed mine. My life stayed mine. I would not become Moretti property, a trophy, a secret, or a woman kept behind expensive doors. I had the right to say no. I had the right to walk away. And if I stayed, it would not be because my sister owed him, or because my father had saved him, or because fear had pushed me into his arms. It would be because I chose him. Dante listened to every word like a vow. "What do you want now?" he asked. I looked around the shop, at the scratched counter, the buckets of flowers, the old floorboards that had held my father's secrets, and the door where the black envelope had first appeared. "I want a life where I didn't have to pay debts that were never mine." Dante stepped closer, slowly enough for me to stop him. I did not. Vanessa had owed him everything. I had owed him nothing. Maybe that was why, when I finally chose him, Dante Moretti looked at me like I was the first thing in his life that had ever come freely. This story exists within the realm of fiction, where imagination shapes reality. Any similarities to real-life individuals, organizations, or events are entirely coincidental. The author does not endorse or represent any real entity through the content of this work.
The deeper meaning of this story is not only about a mafia boss, a dangerous debt, or a forbidden love. At its heart, this is a story about emotional freedom. Clara Whitmore spends her whole life paying for mistakes she did not make. She protects her sister, forgives her again and again, and calls it love. But through pain, betrayal, and danger, Clara learns one of the hardest lessons in life. Loving someone does not mean allowing them to destroy you. Vanessa owes Dante Moretti everything: money, protection, mercy, and a second chance. But she mistakes being saved for being loved. That is one of the moral warnings of the story. When we depend too much on someone's rescue, we may begin to believe they belong to us. But gratitude is not ownership. Help is not love. And being protected does not give anyone the right to demand another person's heart. Dante, the mafia boss, also carries a lesson. He is powerful, feared, and controlled, but he does not truly understand love at first. To him, protection and control feel the same. Clara teaches him that real love must leave room for freedom. If you protect someone, but take away their voice, their choices, and their dignity, then it is not love anymore. It is another kind of prison. The strongest lesson belongs to Clara. She learns to stop paying debts that were never hers. She still loves her sister, but she no longer sacrifices herself to cover Vanessa's consequences. That is maturity. That is strength. True kindness is not weakness, but kindness without boundaries can become self-destruction. This story reminds us that real power is not only money, fear, or control. Real power is knowing when to stand up, when to say no, when to forgive, and when to walk away. In the end, love is not a debt. Love is a choice, free, honest, and earned every day.